First, I want to sort of situate so everyone knows sort of who you are. Could you just tell me, how you got into this process of filmmaking? Because I think filmmakers enter the medium through very different routes, and it affects the kind of work that you do. So I'm curious, sort of, if you go down the line, maybe starting with you, Daresha.
Okay, let's see, the beginning. I started off studying acting. And between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I got a job. I went to the office where they help you figure out what you're gonna do. I forget what that's called, but it's been a while. In the career counseling office. I went there and they had this book with all the alumni who had filled out a questionnaire saying that how they could help you. And the only one who actually said, I'll hire people, was a filmmaker. He was a documentary filmmaker, and so he seemed really nice on paper, so I thought, let me call him, because this was back in the days before I would have emailed him. I called him on the phone, and he was lovely and said, oh, I'd love to meet you. We met, and I worked on his film, which was about housing discrimination in the Bronx that entire summer, and realized that this was something that sort of engaged all these different skill sets that I had. Organizing, budgeting, the creative part, the writing, fundraising, just like, I get to boss people around, and it was just like, yeah, I could do this. So I kind of that's how I started, and I worked in the independent film community in New York for many years, working on other people's projects, doing everything from assistant camera, assistant editor, production assistant, of course, a million jobs. Associate producer, just kind of working my way around the industry, learning, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I mean, I should have known I'm bossy, so I should have known I wanted to direct, but I just thought, I should know how to do everything, and so I studied filmmaking that way. And then I finally decided, okay, I'm serious about this, and I went to film school. I went to NYU. So that's kind of how I got into the business.
Thank you. Florencia?
I was obsessed with movies as a child and teenager, and when the time came to go to college, I was like, well, I guess I saw there were film studies, I was like, temporarily I'll put film until I figure out what I want to do in my life. So I ended up going to film school, and then I was like, oh, you can do this for your life, or you can at least study it. And I went to college where you got hands-on experience from day one. You could crew on set, so I just crewed every single weekend of college, and yeah, by the time I came out, I knew that I wanted to do it.
I was always an artist type, so I love telling stories. I used to write poetry and write, and I also drew. I think that filmmaking as a whole kind of combines both together. It's like painting a picture, at least for me. So, I've always been very quiet. So, writing and telling stories through this is my medium to find a voice. So I think that's where I started from. But I actually started actually it's funny, I'll just say this. I just realized I know Daresha. I've known her for over 20 years and didn't realize it until I sat down here. And I used to intern at a place called Third World Newsreel. I think I was 17, and I remember meeting her and loving her back then. So we lost touch all these years, so it's such a blessing to see you here. I'm so proud of you, I really am. So
thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So, but I came from music videos. I don't know if you can tell from my work. So did a lot of hip hop music videos and things like that. So it took my artistry, but I've always did that to train myself as a director on set.
Yeah, which is a kind of, so many of our celebrated directors these days came from music videos, like Christopher Nolan, right, and maybe Spike Jonze as well.
Spike Jonze, yes.
Spike
I don't think
Jonze,
Christopher Nolan came.
Right, no, he did independent features, yeah. So actually, that was leading to my next question, Bobby. Maybe you can start since you brought it up about the projects that you did before today, Marz, and talk about what music videos and maybe other work that you did as well taught you about your investments in storytelling.
for me, it's really about learning how to deal with people, I think. I think that's what all the jobs, I've probably directed over 100 music videos and commercials, and each one was a lesson for me to study how to be a better leader, how to visualize what's in your head and put it on screen, and you know, communicating with your crew. It's a family environment. I like to build a family environment, so that's the learning process. Each job is a learning process, and I think at least with music videos, it's a short learning process. So you are on set for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and you're done. So each one was a mini class for me. And that's how I developed my skills in trying to better myself each time. And each time I was about, what can I explore, you know, meaningfully or visually within the medium that I had. So.
And how many of those were gospel music videos of the many that you did?
I was telling him earlier, there was a point from like 2009 to 2012 where I did nothing but gospel music videos for a moment. It was very interesting, and nobody knew that these top, you know, gospel artists was directed by an Asian guy. Nobody knew. But I did it with meaning, because to me, I'm not exactly religious, but I believe that music touches spiritually a heartfelt thing, and to me, I wanted to, I don't know if this answers the question, but I wanted to be able to make something that would help elevate the music and touch the masses. And I think that evokes why I like filmmaking, because filmmaking is about creating a heartfelt connection with the viewer, at least with narratives and documentaries. You want to connect with your viewer, you want to hit them in the heart, and that's the goal for me. So each gospel job was almost like a mini movie where I got a chance to touch the viewers.
And when I think about gospel, you know, it's like, in some ways, kind of like one of the original American music forms. You know, it really sets the foundation for a lot of other music forms. And it is all about that, like, connecting your spirit and your body to other people and expressing yourself. And so I'm just curious, you know, as an Asian director, directing, I would assume, mostly Black performers, you know, what did you learn about how to bring out the expressive potential of someone who was different from you on set?
Yeah,
I think was that a challenge at all?
Was it a challenge? Everything is a challenge. Everything is a challenge. I grew up with certain types of music. I grew up in New York City. It's very much a melting pot. I think that when I went to school down south in Louisiana, New Orleans, and that's where I was really, you know, impassioned with the scene, the culture, and that's where it came naturally. It did come naturally, but again, it goes back to every music, at least for me, you know, I studied actually opera too, I sang opera to country. There's soul in it. It's just how does it come out of you? I'm probably off topic, but I'll try to bring it back on topic. Everybody has a voice. So filmmaking is telling your voice. So for me, what I did wasn't trying to change anything, it was just to interpret what's in my heart as a voice, what's coming out of me. So gospel related to me because when I hear it, I'm not literally listening to the message per se as much as how does it make me feel. And it actually makes me feel closer to whatever energy is out there. I feel it deep in here. So that's where I direct from. That's where my ideas come from. Is that the best way to answer, I think?
That's a pretty good answer.
Did I lose?
No, you're
track?
I liked it.
Florencia, could you talk about, you know, what are the steps that you thought were integral to getting to the point where you could create something like Dyke Central? What previous projects primed you for that experience?
Yeah, that's a good question because.
Or life experience.
Yeah, I think my experience of growing up female sort of rendered me with a pretty intense lack of confidence. So I crewed on a lot of projects after college, and you know, a lot of indie shorts and some features and other projects, and it was mostly dudes who were extremely confident that whatever they were like writing or putting out there was totally worth making and shooting, and it took me a really long time to get to that point, and I'm definitely not at that point now. I would say I'm not overconfident, but I'm like, oh, okay, some people want to watch this, but that was the longest journey, I would say, the final step to where I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna make my first feature, and I feel at this point that some people are gonna wanna watch it. This is actually what I would have wanted to watch when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I didn't see, people like me and my friends reflected, and but yeah, prior to that point, I got a lot of set experience, ADing, that is, scheduling and like really putting together a film shoot. So I had already had the experience of kind of working with people who didn't really know what they were doing. So I had that, okay, I do know how to make a film shoot happen and run it efficiently and actually like on a very low budget. So yeah, so that took many years, and then I made my feature, which, well, I had made a couple shorts before. I made my feature, which was like the steepest learning curve ever, and I probably would have done things differently in a different order, but and then yeah, again, like every project, like you were saying, Bobby, you learn and grow so much with each one, and developing that. So after that, this was like before Episodics really became a thing, before all of the attention really focused on series. Like before there was that huge shift of, like resources and viewership on series more than features. And I was writing my second feature, and it seemed like the fundraising was just an impossible uphill battle. And I was kind of very loosely and in a fun way developing this series, Dyke Central, in a fun way. But then a friend of mine who I had done a lot, or like some favors for, inherited some money and gave me $5,000 towards my next project, which at the time was gonna be my feature. But I was like, that's like a drop in the bucket for this feature, but I could shoot the pilot episode of this thing. So I switched gears and shot the pilot, and then the pilot did festivals, and then that kind of got the rest of the series going over a long time period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how you talk about learning both by doing, but then also by like seeing how not to do it, if you will. Like those are equally important parts of the experience. And I'm just wondering if there was any particular moment where you were just like, oh, this person is doing it wrong, I can do it better. And that was that moment sort of catalyzing for you? Or was it just like, I've just been doing this and I think I can do it on my own? Or was it both?
I'm a really good scheduler. So I feel like I figured out how to shoot a lot of content in the most efficient way. So I think being on set where like things aren't scheduled and organized properly, and therefore it takes you longer, and therefore it costs you more, and it takes more resources. I learned a lot from being on sets that were not tightened, or where there were things that fell through the cracks. And so I think, and one of my co-producers might be here for Dyke Central. She works at the Roxy. She's amazing. But yeah, we figured out how to shoot in a very, very efficient way by the time we got to the end of the show. And the amount of time that maybe at the beginning it took like to make 2 episodes or whatever, I think we shot 5 episodes in less than 3 weeks, which is, almost like, no, yeah. Anyway, we got really efficient, yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about how in a little bit. Daresha, you are now in the sort of position where you are leading projects, it seems, and doing obviously really brilliant work. So I'm curious, sort of following this line, how you reached the point where you were like, I'm ready to take that leadership role, and what project was that really forced you to do that? Because I find that when I work with creators, that is the hardest hurdle. Just like, I see everyone in power, they're all white dudes. How do I feel like I have the 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 wherewithal and the clout to actually do that?
When I was in film school, so I worked on all these different projects, other people's projects, and then I worked at a lot of different film organizations. So I sort of studied the industry. I worked in distribution, I worked in programming, I worked in funding, I worked in equipment rental, just every sort of angle of filmmaking. And I met a lot of filmmakers and wound up working on their projects. So it was sort of this machine, this animal that feeds itself and just keeps growing and growing. So by the time I got to film school, I was pretty confident that this was what I wanted to do. I'm one of those people who always tells you a story in the most entertaining way I can find, and it might be a little long, but well, you will have fun on the journey, So I'm sort of a natural born storyteller. I like telling stories, I like talking to people, I'm blah, chatty little Kathy, right? So by the time I got to film school, I was like, this is something I'm supposed to do, because this is like, all my little skill set. This is where it's like everything comes to bear and can bear fruit. And when I got to school, school is a great place to get your confidence, because you make these things and you put them up on the screen and they're horrible, absolutely horrible. But so is the next person, right? Every once in a while somebody makes something good and you're like, how'd you do that, right? And everybody wants to know, but you're all learning together, So it builds your confidence, and then your work starts to get better, and you start to understand what it takes to translate out of your head onto the screen. And so that, for me, was invaluable, being in film school and having that time to incubate, So that by the time I started to, my strategy while I was in school was I'm gonna make a film, a short, and I'm gonna use that short to raise the money to make the next short. And that's what I did. I made a film in school. It got a little bit of buzz around it, I got into a couple of festivals, blah, blah, blah. And then I had, because every time you apply for money, people want a sample. I'm like, my God, if I had a sample, I wouldn't be asking you for money. So, it's like the catch-22 of filmmaking, right? So, I mean, it's easier now because everything's digital. You can shoot your damn sample with your phone. But those days, it was 16 millimeter, and that dish is not cheap. So that was my strategy: make a film, use that film to raise the money to make the next film, right? And so then that's how I did it. And in terms of confidence, like I said, I was just kind of doing everything. So I kind of felt like I had a good overall understanding. And then there is nothing to teach you to make movies except making movies. You have to do it. You have to just put yourself out there. You have to risk it. You have to be embarrassed with your friends or with strangers. Because sometimes you throw up on the screen and you're expecting, ha ha ha, and it's just like crickets. That's it, right? Then well, that didn't work. Gotta do something else, right? But the best way to learn how to make movies is just to make them.
I want to ask you then, Daresha, if you could talk about the kind of stories that you're drawn to, and why you were drawn specifically to tell this story, Dispatches from Cleveland.
So I like stories that are transformative, that, when you finish the film, you're not the way you don't feel the way you did when you started the film, And you've either learned something, or you've changed something, or you've grown, or you've experienced something powerful, or something. I want something to happen to you as a result of the film,
Yeah, can I just say that I had coffee with a friend who's a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he saw Chavela last night, and that's exactly what he said about it. He was like, he walked away and he just could not stop thinking about it. Like, it was like literally he felt himself transforming after watching it.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Oh my God, my chair broke.
Your chair is transforming.
It actually did, I'm not kidding. So, should I just keep talking? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna hold really tight to the arms. What was I
saying?
You were talking about the stories that inspire you.
Okay, so I love outsiders. I like rebels. I like badasses. I like people who do things. I like bold people who go places that the rest of us are cheering for them, but not necessarily running after them. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow, you did that? You go, girl, right?
Go.
You go. You're your bad self. So I'm drawn to people who are brave, because I feel like they teach us how to be brave ourselves. They show us the way. They're way showers, the people who are willing to go out there on the edge and jump up and down and peer over the edge and then jump, When the rest of us are like, wow. So that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for stories that jump, And so and I feel like the way that I connect to a story is I just get kind of caught. Like it catches something. It either catches my imagination. Yeah, it catches my imagination, and it catches my admiration. And so, like, for example, with Chavella, it's just like, I just was so inspired by this woman. I'm like, I want other people to have that same experience, to like meet this woman and learn about her and be like, God damn, she was a badass, And be like, oh, so if she could do that, maybe I could do what I've been afraid to do, right?
And so, yeah, I'm going to have you all talk about your current project. So talk a little bit about what Dispatches in Cleveland sort of covers. I mean, it covers a lot of ground. There's like a very Cleveland-specific story. There's a national story about police violence. So it's a complex story you had to tell. How would you describe the story and why you chose to tell it the way you did?
Well, I didn't direct it, I produced it. So, a lot of the actual crafting of the storytelling, I was helping and I was contributing and saying, why don't we move this here, put this here. But the ultimate decisions were Kat's decisions in terms of how the stories were structured. But the entire time that she was making, so we were producing and directing Chavella together, and she was directing Dispatches from Cleveland. And that was happening for about a year, and then after a year, and she asked me if I would finish Dispatches from Cleveland. So I came in actually kind of late on the project, and a lot of it had already been shot, so a lot of it was actually the sculpting of it in post-production, And so Kat grew up in Cleveland for a certain part of her life, like her early childhood. She spent in Cleveland, and her family has strong roots there, and she still has a lot of family members there. So she was going back she lives in New York. We both lived in New York at the time. She was traveling to Cleveland almost every month or every 6 weeks to shoot, trying to keep up with what was happening there. And initially, I think her idea was really just to document a year in the life of the organizing committee, the people on the ground in Cleveland, starting with the convening of the Black Lives Matter movement, which happened in June or July of 2015, all the way up to the Republican National Convention in 2016. So whatever the RNC is I think it's June. So from June to June, right? And in the process, we realized that, the story was kind of like vague, it wasn't focused on a particular person. It's sort of like a year in the life of the community. And then we realized that what was coming into shape was people who were organizing to oust their district attorney because of his failure to indict any of the police officers who were killing innocent people, including a 12-year-old named Tamir Rice. So all along, she was talking to the organizers, and then she started talking to Tamir's mother and his cousin and his family. And so once this campaign around getting McGinty out of office it sort of became the focal point to the organizing community, to galvanize the people of Cleveland, who are, Cleveland is the most segregated city, or one of the most segregated cities in the country. And it's deeply impoverished, and it's deeply underfunded. It's a city in crisis. Excuse me, because it's one of these cities that was built on industry, and the industry's all gone. So the infrastructure, the bottom has fallen out. And so it was easy to sort of hone the story along the lines of what these people did to get this guy out of office. But that didn't become clear until they got him out of office.
Right. Yeah. And the film sort of takes you on that journey too, right? Because when you start it, you don't realize that that's necessarily where sort of the beginning of the story is just a lot about like Tamir Rice, right? And like, you know, the kind of legal framework that allows police to get away with this kind of thing. And then you're very quickly realizing, okay, but when you're angry, you need something or someone to direct your anger at. And it becomes very clear that kind of changes the narrative from one of just like, we're all doomed to like, we can try and change the system maybe just a little bit. So I do want to talk about that, but I want to also have other folks talk about how you entered Dyke Central. And specifically, like, what is the story of Dyke Central? Because it's a ensemble cast in many ways. And so necessarily then a complex story. So I'm curious sort of how you thought about that story and, you know, if you can communicate to the audience for those who haven't seen it, what it actually is.
Well, I've always considered myself stronger at character writing, and what I'm attracted to are stories or shows or movies that kind of explore the subtleties of the human experience more than like high drama, you know. I kind of hate all screenwriting books because they're like, make the stakes as high as possible. I'm like, but we actually generally like function in like the gray area where things are not, you know, live or die, and that's really interesting to me. It's like the things that I relate to the most in the day-to-day and like the subtleties of relationships. And anyway, so that's generally that's my general orientation in the material that I create, you know. Yeah, it really was born, I mean, after I made my first big movie, just everybody, you know, there's not that many narrative filmmakers in the Bay Area. Everybody was like, oh, you know, you should make a TV show about Oakland, about us, like about people like us. And I, at the time, was coming off of making a feature, so I was like, no, that you have no idea how much work that is, you know, and it was actually very annoying, you know. People are like, oh yeah, you should like dedicate the next 5 years of your life to this thing, because I think it's a great idea. But at some point, you know, then I was dating someone who's like, oh yeah, let's write this thing, even though they had like no experience either and had no idea what work it would take. But I just got into like starting to create the characters, and that's what generally like, you know, then the characters just started like living with me, and you know, like story, yeah, it's taking over. It's like they're friends, you know, and you're, oh, this goes with this person. Oh, I think this person, you know, this personality type is, you know, and this, I think this, I want them to go there. So yeah, that's kind of how it came to be, you know, based on the experiences that I've had in my own, you know, relationships and friendships, and then my community and my friends, you know, and wanting to include all that and bring something that where my community can see itself reflected, at least a portion of my community.
Yeah.
Definitely impossible to represent everyone, and I always get complaints about, you know, some type of person that I'm not representing, but, you know, within that time frame. And also I will say, you know, there are 8 main characters, and I do not recommend that to anybody who is writing a series, because that, yeah, it just made it a bit of a nightmare, and it just made it such a bigger and you know, more difficult thing to shoot than it could have been if I had like 4 main characters, especially because half of them are not professional actors, so they had full-time jobs, and you know, they would give me like very small windows of availability, and it became a bit of a crazy juggling act. Yeah.
I was curious about whether or not you wrote for specific people who you wanted to play those roles, or if you cast everything, because I know that especially with web series, when you're talking about like pretty intimate storylines, people sometimes are drawing from real people who actually maybe want to play out those stories.
Okay, I would never do that. But I wrote one role for one person, the person who plays Jin. She is one of my closest friends. She also acted in Fiona's script, my feature, and she's feminine, and I really wanted to write a masculine of-center role for her. So yeah, so I wrote that role for her. Most people don't recognize her when they meet her in person, and but everything else came through casting process. Yeah, and I don't know, I can talk more about that later, the casting process.
Yeah. Bobby, Marz, what led you to tell this story? It's such, first of all, obviously it's beautiful. And not only in terms of how it looks, but also in terms of the complexity of the characters and the things that they're struggling with. What inspired you to tell the story, and then also why did you tell it in the way that you told it?
Well, this is a very long part of my life project. I originally came up with the idea for a feature film. It was originally called Martian, until The Martian came out. And I started writing it 12, 13 years ago, a long time ago. So what inspired it? A few things. It was inspired by some of the people that I had grown up around, that I knew about their backgrounds, and it's relating to sexuality, identity, but also the deeper issues of growing up. There's many other issues I actually didn't play in, that's in the feature, but we'll talk about that as episodic, why I feel like this can be a better episodic. That's why I developed it that way. But I guess it's a love story, an homage to young Black, Latino people of color growing up, to really show them to love yourself. And the best way for me to do that was to use hip-hop culture, because of how popular it was and it is, to take the tabooness of sexuality in hip-hop and put it together. Because in the inner cities of, at least where I'm from in New York, everybody loves hip-hop. It's everywhere, it's worldwide. But inside the communities, it's still a lot of internal hatred. You deal with people that grow up with their families not accepting who they are. They go out on the street, things happen. It's so many other things that I wanted to tackle. There was so many years of research and talking to people, and the biggest thing that I really found was when I told people, I said, I'm writing a script about this. Everybody wanted to say, oh my God, please tell me, talk about this and put this in there, and you need to tell this story because it's my story. I want to be heard. So on a bigger level, it reflects my passion for change and justice, and also to represent the unspoken, I don't know what the right word is, but give voice to the voiceless. And for me, the voiceless is any injustice in this world, but for this particular project, it was like a love story to where I came from, and using these characters and writing them was not as hard as I thought. And when I actually went internal and went inside, what's your intention? So these two characters, they speak one thing, but they really mean another. And I think that's something we all do and we can all relate to. And ultimately, that's what I wanted the audience to get out of it. And I actually wanted the audience to be people that maybe hate what they see, that have hate in their heart. I wanted to provide love and say, these characters are just like you. They feel the same way, they want the same things, and that's what inspired me to push forward and keep this project going all these years. So.
Self-love is so important. I think definitely a theme that probably comes up a lot at Frameline, because I really do believe what RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, you can't love anybody else, right? And there's so much in society that tells you there's parts of yourself that aren't good, aren't worthy, and I think that is a really difficult thing to communicate cinematically. So I don't know if you thought about, in the way that you directed, produced it, like how to represent that? Or was it in the writing only, or yeah?
No, it's actually more visual for me. I'm probably more visual than, I'm not really the best writer, but I am a director-writer in the sense of I like to write what's in my head and maybe work with a writer to make it better, you know. But yeah, I think what I wanted to do, and I think what I love about filmmaking is to imbue meaning into the frame, you know. So, and we try our best, and it takes time and practice. But you know, meaning within composition, meaning within lighting. So a lot of that was carefully planned to mimic the feeling and the emotions. I'm really influenced by, obviously, everybody is Wong Kar-wai and Christopher Doyle and In the Mood for Love. I mean, that was a big influence for me. And actually, ironically, before I did this, I met, what's the DP? Bradford Young. And I remember meeting him and I said, did you watch In the Mood for Love? He's like, that was one of my, I shouldn't say that was one of my main influences, you know, in doing whatever film it was. I think it was like Andrew Desume's film. But I was like, wow, I said, I love that. I feel that. So that was the biggest influence visually in terms of, in my head, placing them to show separation between their hearts. So that, you know, I put a lot of time into that. Of course, when you're on the set, all that goes out the door when you're on the set. So you think all the stuff you're gonna do, but then you have problems getting locations and props and art direction, but you attempt to do that. So it gives me better understanding and respect for the filmmakers that really achieve that perfection. It's very hard, as I learned. So that's the production side.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit about if any of you could speak to challenging that you had in production that shifted the way you told the story and sort of where those challenges stem from. Were they resources? Was it just, you know, bad luck? Any thoughts on that? Especially Florencia or Daresha?
Well, just continuing real quick,
Yeah.
it's time. Time is money.
Yeah.
So everything in my film that I planned so carefully for, I ran out of time. If I look at my film now, I cringe, and I wish I had another day to shoot the main scene. Or then you deal with children. I had children, and you can only shoot children for less than 8 hours. There's a cutoff time. Like, I had to rush everything in the end. So you do your best, you hope for the best, and you just make it work. So.
Oh yeah, challenges. I would say one of the first ones that I had that took me by surprise, and I feel like sort of reflected at me my lack of maturity as a director was, you know, I had cast a lot of non-actors, and they maybe were amazing in rehearsal. They were great during the casting process. But I remember first day of shooting, one of my cast members really froze up, you know, and really had like a lot of anxiety, and because they're not a trained actor, they didn't really have a toolbox for how to handle that, and I wasn't prepared for that. And so we were like set to shoot a certain amount of things in that day, but I didn't really get what I wanted, and I remember then for the second round of shooting, just really needing to take that into consideration. And actually, for when we went back, because we did the pilot, and then 2 years later, we went back and shot episodes 2 through 5. And before that, one of my professional actor cast members helped put together like basically a little boot camp for the untrained actors, where they could learn a lot of things that you know, go beyond your natural like on-screen charisma or your natural instincts, but you know, how to break down a script, how to get into or like use that nervousness or anxiety and all of that. So that was a challenge that we worked with. We also we were robbed at gunpoint 3 days before we wrapped, so that was probably the biggest challenge. Yeah, again, I don't know if like Lex is here, but yeah, we had 3 days left of shooting to finish the entire season. We lost, you know, everything that we had shot that day, and the like equipment, basically the camera and the sound equipment that were stolen, and we had options. We basically what happened was we had some people from LA. One of my leads was actually pregnant, so there were like all of these, you know, puzzle pieces that if we didn't keep shooting, it would have all kind of fallen apart. So that was definitely a test moment for me, and we decided to keep shooting the next day with, you know, Lex, my co-producer. We sort of like took everybody's, you know, and actually a lot of all of the cast members were like, yes, we want to keep shooting. We don't want this to derail us and whatnot. But some of the crew members were traumatized, and so, you know, it was difficult. And I had the same thing where, you know, in those last 3 days, it definitely compromised some of the footage that I got towards the end, because we had to change shooting location, you know. Like my pregnant cast member didn't want to shoot anywhere in the neighborhood of where we were robbed, so we had to like change some things that were planned. So we really had to hustle and hold space for everybody feeling really tender the ensuing days. But we totally pulled it off, and yeah, I think it really brought a lot of us closer together. Yeah, so definitely the biggest challenge. Mm-hmm.
That is a nightmare.
Did
That's
you
a nightmare.
It is, yeah.
That's just like, that's not a challenge. Oh my God. What? I'm in shock, really. I mean, that's just.
So I want to give you the opportunity to answer the production challenges question, or we can also talk about, we are going to open it for questions soon, but we can also talk about your exhibition plans and the ways in which obviously the online arena is helping that, or the episodic framework is helping that. So you can respond to either or both.
I can talk about challenging. We had nothing that even begins to compare to that. That's just such a nightmare, and I'm so sorry that happened. Oh my goodness. So, you know, I can't even follow that. I think our biggest challenge was that we were so far away from the story that was being told that we missed a lot of things, you know. And it was hard to keep building the relationships, you know, with the subjects of the film. Some of them who knew some of those people, then it was easier because they were building on what they had already established. But for the new people, it would be like, you know, you come and then you go away for 6 weeks, and that's a long time, and a lot happens. And people, not being filmmakers, don't realize what kinds of things to tell you about, you know, that are going to happen, or to even tell you, oh, this is going to be this really big event, blah, 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 you should be there, you should shoot this. They're not thinking as a filmmaker, they don't know anything about filmmaking. They don't know what's going to be an important part of your story or not, or even what you're trying to do. Like, you know, they don't know anything about the process. And so there were a lot of things that we would find out about afterwards that would be like, oh my God, we should have shot that, you know? So I think that was one of the biggest challenging. And then there's always the challenge of, we need more money. Where are we going to find this money? Who's going to give us some money? Please, somebody. Give us some money.
Yeah. Everybody knows about that challenge. Except maybe Baz Luhrmann. I think he's fine, but everyone else needs budget. So I can't see Harry. Are we at Q&A time? We can be. I have more questions, but I would love for you all to have an opportunity to ask these folks questions about their stories, their plans. Here. Wait for the mic, because I think there's people in the back who hear
you. Something you said earlier, Florencia, made me wonder, specifically for you, but I think anyone could probably speak to this. You talked about the things that you wish you had done differently, and I kind of want to hear more specifics about that. What are the things you wish you had done differently, and how would you do them different?
Okay. I mean, I could say that for every project, but I guess I'll talk about Dyke Central. I had no, I mean, it was a tricky time because it was when, like the web series explosion hadn't happened yet, so we shot kind of thinking like, oh, TV pilot. But I really wish that I had had the knowledge around how to prep something for release and like create buzz and create like marketing materials that maybe do a little research about, you know, marketing materials and not just kind of like, oh, what's a cool design, but, you know, really kind of create a branding around the project and create a distribution plan, because I think that's kind of the side that, to be perfectly honest, like, I'm not interested in, and it's not really my thing. You know, I just want to create the content. So I had a lot of resistance to learn fully and study it, and realize that I needed to put a lot of energy and attention into that. So I'd say that's definitely one thing. Yeah, and like simple things like doing like a professional like photo shoot, you know, with the actors beforehand, you know, not like as an afterthought after like somebody requests this stuff, but really having all of the materials.
Can Bobby and Daresha also talk about your challenges around marketing, exhibition, getting attention, if you've had any, or what your plans are?
Well, I'm developing Marz into an episodic series, and it was originally shot as a proof of concept for a feature, but after you know, reviewing the possibilities I see right now, it's a better time to expand on the story, to expand on the dialogue, and including some of the which, you know, Moonlight has started. I thought this would be a really great time to expand on the story. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of distribution, and it's new to me. You know, I'm a creator as well, so, you know, I'm here to learn and talk to people and figure out all the ways to do it. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you make this stuff because you want to share stories, and then you're like, oh, but how do I get it to get people to watch it? And that has been a challenge with Dispatches as well, because a lot of content, similar kind of content, has come out along the same time. You know, Whose Streets came out, and it's not the same story, but those stories are intertwined and connected, and it's kind of like funders and distributors kind of feel like, oh, well, we have that, you know, like we want something different. We know we want something else. So we have there's like already 2 films that are dealing with police brutality. So, you know, go on, move over, right? So I wish that we had from the beginning focused more on finding a platform for the project before we completed the project. It's a little bit easier because then you can give whoever you're going to partner with a higher investment in the project, because they then have stuff to say about it, and they can give you some feedback, and they're more invested, not just financially, but emotionally. They're more emotionally invested in the project. So, you know, it's a process of learning, right? It's you keep, every time you do a new project, you got new challenges, and you just sort of figure them out, and then hire somebody the next time to help you do better, you know.
Just a question for Daresha. I was at the screening yesterday, and you said that you had an all-female crew and staff work on Shavella. Was that a conscious decision, and was it a challenge in this industry that is, you know, very hard for women to work in, to get women?
It was really interesting. Yes, it was a conscious decision to have primarily women. There were more men than just the one that we mentioned. We were kind of joking. We did have like a driver and I'm not joking. We did have like a driver in Spain and a PA, you know, but our DP and our sound woman and, you know, our line producer, our local producer in each country, they were all women. And when we first went to the line producer, so we hired the line producer to sort of be, you know, our eyes and ears on the ground and help us crew up and help us get the locations and lock down the interviews and schedule, blah, blah, blah. So we found those amazing women. In Mexico, we had a woman named Gabriela, and in Spain, we had a woman named Lena, both of whom were producers in their own right and had made films, and so that's why we hired them, because they knew the lay of the land. And then we were like, okay, so now we want you to find us a DP and a sound person. And they both were like, really? Because I don't know any. And it was shocking to us that they had to then go searching. Both of them had to search for. I think our problem in Mexico was a sound woman. Our line producer knew a female cinematographer, but she didn't know any sound women. And we actually were supposed to work with a man, and then he got sick the day before the shoot, and he recommended a woman, right? So that happened in Mexico, and then in Spain, it was the exact opposite. We had a sound woman, and she had a hard time finding a DP, and eventually she got this amazing, talented woman who gave us all these beautiful shots that we brought them back, and our editor was literally in a state of ecstasy. She was like, oh my God, this footage is so beautiful. Wait till you see what I'm gonna do with it. Okay, girl, have at it, you know, knock yourself out. But yeah, it was a conscious decision, and it was something that Kat was very, very, very much about, you know, and I was like, yeah, I'm all about it too. But it wasn't my idea initially to really focus on women, particularly in these Latino, you know, Hispanic cultures, where it's even more of a challenge. It's a challenge here, but I know a lot of female filmmakers and DPs and sound people here in the United States. So, you know, in Mexico and in Spain, it's obviously even more of a challenge since it was so hard for them, you know, to find these women.
I just want to say, I also generally work with the majority female crew, and what I found is that when you really like kind of promote and use language when you're looking for crew, you know, first off, you know, it's like, oh, Dyke Central, we're making like an Oakland-based queer, you know, dramedy or whatever. I had like an amazing sound woman who was like, hi, who is a queer woman. She's like, I want to work on this. What do I need to do? So that was great. And DP as well, like a DP that had AC'd on my feature or gripped, was like, hey, I'm a DP now, you know, I really, really want to work on this. So I think if you use language, especially around like, you know, women and people of color, like strongly encouraged to apply, and this is like like it's gonna be a female, like dominated set, you know, please be comfortable with that, then the right people, whatever their gender identity and expression is, like will be attracted to it. We had, you know, some really awesome guys on set who were super down for a female dominated crew, so.
Can I ask you all, just to follow up, to talk a little bit about if you think that changed the set dynamic, positively or negatively? I think for me, for OpenTV, especially with Brown Girls, which was 95% women and people of color and queer folks, the director, Sam Bailey, you know, said that it was easier to film certain scenes because the actors felt comfortable with everyone behind set, and as a director, she could see how the scene was playing amongst the people represented it through the crew, and it made it easier for her to know like which takes were better or whatever. I don't know if you saw any of those dynamics in any of your sets.
Yes. Yeah, I like in Fiona's script, the DP was a cis white male, but my AC was this amazing queer woman at the time, who, when we came to shoot the sex scene, it was my first time shooting a sex scene. It was both of the actresses' first time. She took over, and if she, you know, if we hadn't had her there, that I don't think it would have worked out the way it did, and it was, you know, beautiful. And then, yeah, we had that on Dyke Central as well. We had like a closed set, and I really think that people felt a lot more comfortable around like intimate scenes and being able to let their guard down. But I will say for me, and this is something that after working on a lot, like so many male-dominated sets, I mean, the thing about it is the ego, right? And to me, it's not so much about gender, like it as it is about ego. It's just that, you know, when you have a bunch of dudes, the ego situation seems to get, you know, exalted. But like I said, you know, we had some great male crew members that didn't bring any ego whatsoever to set, and one of them actually, he was a gaffer. He stepped in as DP to sub for the primary DP several times, and he was fantastic. And on my most recent short that is screening here, I had a male DP who actually ended up having like a much easier time working with him than with the female DP that kind of like backed out. So I think the ego is the thing that needs to like be erased from set life, and that really interrupts like, you know, the creativity and like getting things done.
I think that one thing I can say, I mean, when I walk on, I mean, all these years, when I walk on a set, I'm about what's inclusivity. I represent that, and it's always been something that, even just starting, I was very conscious about in some ways, and it's never about hiring just who's the best, but it's also about hiring outside of the big boy, the big white male, because that's all it is. It's a lot of nepotism out there. I think it's okay to find and search for somebody to give another person a chance, and I believe in giving people a chance, and I think I fully support that, I guess. That's what I need to say, so I think it's important.
Another question back there. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question about the episodic form that you've all chosen to work in. Maybe you can just summarize in a way what advantages the actual episodic form has for you, because not every story idea, you know, needs to be in that format. And I'm wondering what advantages it has for you. Is it all just about flexibility in the story, or flexibility in the amount of money it's going to take, or the flexibility in being able to post it and not necessarily have a big, you know, middle person to help you get it out there? What is it about that form that works, and where it fails?
I mean, I think in terms of writing content, you get to go so much deeper with the characters and explore so much more outside of, you know, the one arc and maybe the other arc. But, you know, you get to see somebody like hit rock bottom, come up, you know, go down, and like you see a full span of their experience. So that's what I love about episodic. And also, like, you know, like I said with Dyke Central, it allowed me to shoot in short increments. If you have like very little money at the beginning, you know, you can shoot one episode, but maybe, and then use that to like fundraise for the future episodes. Yeah, so that's that flexibility.
I think creatively, it's exactly what you said. It's about, for me, it's what is the end goal? The end goal is to tell a story. And I think for me, the excitement of an episodic is to be able to explore the subject matter more than just 90 minutes or 2 hours. So it's really as simple as that. You know, I think that right now I'm in a zone of, I'm thinking of ideas, all the things and that I can explore in this particular story, and all the things that could potentially be really interesting. And we all watch TV shows, we love them, right? So what can we do with this subject matter and make it engrossing?
I think with Dispatches from Cleveland, for part of the process of figuring out how to tell the story, because we had all these different threads, you know, and all these different organizers at different organizations. And some of them were connected to each other and some of them weren't. And then we had all these different kinds of stories, and trying to figure out how to weave them together and what the connections were and how the conversations between them, even when they weren't literally talking to each other, they were figuring out a way to make the story show you that they are still talking about the same things, and they are having conversations through the work that they're doing, and through you know, what the conversations that they're having, and the agendas that they're trying to push forward. And so there came a point, the project started off as one single story. And then at a certain point, there were some things that we thought, okay, we really want to talk about this, but it doesn't really fit in this film. You know, if we're doing it as a film. But if we break them out, we can go into this character story a little more deeply. And we can go into that aspect, you know, we can sort of craft each episode around a theme, and then go a little deeper into that theme without feeling like, you know, oh, there's no really good transition into this other story or this other person, right? Because now it's over. We don't need a transition, you know? Then you could start anew and be, oh, okay, new story, right? So that it's just in terms of crafting a story, you get to do these little arcs like this instead of this one, like you were talking about, the overarching one, right? Do 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 do.
If I may add, one of the reasons why when I started OpenTV that I was very explicit about TV was that I think the beauty of TV is the way it allows stories to be supported over long periods of time. So that helps not only in terms of production, like once you get that buy-in, you can keep getting that buy-in and it's more sustainable. And also in terms of audience investment, I wanted to encourage creators to think about characters that would capture the imaginations of other people and get them curious about where those characters are going. Because I think, especially in this political moment, we have such a difficult time empathizing with one another and really understanding where people are coming from, and I think that can only be achieved over time. So I really love that TV encourages that, as opposed to sort of like, you met this character, their story's over, it's done, you know? More questions?
Anybody else? Oh, you again.
I'm wondering, for episodic and web series content, what do you define as like a success of your series? Because for me, I'm in a simplistic way, I would think it's like the number of views. And have you met those goals? And if you don't want to answer that question, then something related would probably be, what do you see as like defining factors in that success? Like, what do you notice gets more views on an episode, or keeps viewers from one episode to the next, like holds an audience engaged? Does that make sense? Okay.
Well, eyes on a project are always, important. How many views? Just having that little gauge now is just really intimidating because you can see who you're reaching and who you're not. But I think for our project, one of our goals was always to have the films used as organizing tools. So it's important for us to get people's eyeballs on it, but it's also important to us to get this project into the hands of organizers who can use it to educate people about the power that they have in their hands. Because I don't think people know that that the DA, the general attorney, they can get rid of them. People don't seem to sort of put two and two together. And so if we can get this into the hands of voters, get their eyes on, voters' eyes on them, and also get community organizers who are going out there interfacing with people to watch them so that they have more information at their disposal to use, then that to me would be success.
Yeah, I would say having it seen by people. I don't feel that my series has reached its full potential of, obviously. But it's nice when a lot of people give you positive feedback. So it's, to me, I guess success is not like a yes/no thing. It's, there's this spectrum of experiences and of benchmarks, and making some money and, getting out of the red, not getting out of the red, yeah, what was the second part of your question?
What's been helpful in getting viewers to stay with you?
Oh yeah. Cliffhangers. Yeah. That was something that I really consciously realized when I was writing the episodes and watched a bunch of content. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Because if you watch older TV, didn't do cliffhangers. They actually didn't. There was a point where it started to become the practice, and then it just became the always thing. But yeah, it like really works. You know, people really just want to watch, and especially now when it's available to watch immediately, it's very effective. Yeah.
Well, I saw one of your episodes, and it made me want to watch, for sure. I don't know if I'm the best one to answer this, because mine has not, it's still in development, but I think you probably know more about this.
I do have some thoughts on this. I wrote a piece for IndieWire Google called Why Views Don't Matter for Web Series, and I actually really think they don't. There's a lot of evidence to that fact. I think the main one is Broad City, which when they got their development deal with Comedy Central, they were not popular on YouTube. I was keeping track of it because I'd been talking to them before, and I think they had barely one episode that had 10,000 views. You know, that show sold because it was good, and they convinced Amy Poehler that it was good. And so Amy Poehler got them all these meetings, and they sold the show. And it was a hit on Comedy Central, right? It wasn't popular on YouTube, hit show on Comedy Central. Different mediums with marketing support, any show can be a hit. I really think that's true. I will say that Brown Girls was very popular. I won't say how many views yet, but there'll be an article that probably says the aggregate amount. But I talked to Sam and Fatih, and they said they had lots of meetings as well. They said nobody asked them about the views. No one cared, actually. It was a good story, it was a good story, well told, and they'd also been written up a lot, so they got the sense that this was like an important story. I've also seen how we have shows on OpenTV that might not be that popular, but a production company that's looking for new talent might see the show, and they're like, these guys have talent, can you introduce me to them? Or a lot of our creators are artists or performance artists, and so their series allows them to get booked to perform live, right, in other cities, and like people outside of Chicago can sort of see their performance by watching their shows. So I would say, definitely just focus on telling your story, and just keep all your options open about how your story can develop and who might your stakeholders be. Because there's so many different paths to developing programming now. There's so many different production companies and distributors and curators looking for cool things to show so many different communities. So I would say keep focus on the story, write your cliffhangers, don't worry about how it circulates. And I think Harry's telling me that we are done.